We're continuing our sermon series called God's Greater Story, where we're looking at the book of Romans through there. And we're in a very interesting section of Romans. And before we get into that, I really kind of want to talk about something that I kind of saw that's interesting. One of my best buddies has these small twin girls. And I get to see them through like Zoom and all that stuff. Quite often. And one of the things that really stuck with me is kind of how you treat toddlers when they make like a mistake or when they fall. You know, like how toddlers will do. They'll like try to step on something and all of a sudden they fall or kind of fall off, slide off of something, and they get real wide and they look scared for a second. Like, what do? Do you go, "Oh no, are you okay?" Like, and you get in their face and you're like, "Oh, are you okay?" And then they start crying. Like, no, that's not what you do. You play off of it. You're like, "Whoa, can you believe that you that big slide? Like, oopsie, you fell on your bottom," and you make a joke out of it, right? And then they start kind of laughing about it. Like, it's almost like this training in saying that, hey, these small mistakes, it's okay, just laugh them off. And I think that's kind of the idea of being saved by grace. There are these mistakes that we make, but we can laugh them off because we're saved and we're okay. We're fine, right? Like, we can kind of laugh them off. And that's what I think Paul is kind of getting at here. And he talks about that in our previous chapter from last week, in chapter 10, verse 13. He says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved," right? He says that it's for everyone, for grace has saved them all. But he then moves into what he's talking about today. And he says in Romans chapter 11, verse 2, "God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew." It seems like he's rejecting them right now. And that's kind of the crux of where we are. Chapters 9, 10, and 11 of Romans is about the Jews are coming back into Rome after being banished. And the Gentile Christians aren't just allowing them to come back in. They probably have animosity just because they're part of the culture of Rome, that of these Jewish people coming back in. And Paul is saying, realize that it's by grace you have been saved through faith. That it's not that you've been the best Gentile Christian ever. It's that God has brought you in. And that's kind of the main idea that we're talking about today. And this brings us to an interesting metaphor that Paul is using at this point, right? As he's kind of closing his argument about this saved by grace and the relation between the Gentiles and the Jews. And it's one that I don't think we understand right away. It's about grafting in an olive branch. Now, I don't know about you, but I know about it. I probably know about it because Paul uses it here. But I've never grafted in an olive branch. The most grafting I ever done is like I cut the one branch off of the little thing that plumes out in my yard, and I put it in the ground somewhere else because I heard that would grow. And apparently it's working because it hasn't died yet. You know, that's the level of my farming that I have done. But we don't do this, and I think we miss some of the meaning that Paul is getting there, because I've read this story tons of times, and I've missed the meaning here. What they did is that there would be like a wild stump somewhere, a wild shoot for olive branches that's great, but the branches, the limbs, aren't really producing very much fruit. So they would find branches that are very off of other trees, off of other olive trees, that are producing a lot of good fruit, and they would take those and then cut off the branch that isn't producing a lot of fruit and graft in to that good stump, into that good shoot, so that branch can produce all kinds of fruit. That they would do that. And you can see this happening with this image right here. And Paul is saying something very similar to that, but there's one minor detail that he's changed. Let me see if you can catch it as we read from Romans chapter 11, beginning with the 17th verse. "But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share the nourishing root of the olive tree." Remember, he's talking about the Gentile Christians being grafted in. That they share the nourishing root of the olive tree. "Do not be arrogant towards the branches. If you are, remember, it's not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. Notice what he's saying. He's saying that you, the one that is getting grafted in, is the wild branch. You weren't the good branch. I've seen how some of you do things. Like, you weren't the good branch. Okay? Like, that's, when my family talks about me, they don't talk about me being the good branch, right? Like, that's, yeah, like, you weren't the good branch. You're the wild branch. You're the less fruitful branch, in other words, is what he's saying. And if you were listening to this back then, you'd be like, wait a second, that's not how this happens. And that's his point, is that grace is ridiculous and you're saved by ridiculous grace. You're saved by that unmerited grace. And the only reason that you have faith, hope, and love in God is because God has given the grace to you. You aren't the original shoot. You aren't the original thing. You're not supposed to be there, and yet you are, because the Lord loves all of this creation, and He grafts you in. He grafts you in to the power of the root. And detailing it a little further, here in verse 19, he says, then you will say, but branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief. But you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will He spare you. You see, he continues, that he says the Jews, yeah, they may have been broken off now to make room for you, but that they are the actual chosen people of God. So remain humble. Don't become proud. He says, don't let it go to your head. Don't become so arrogant in your own beliefs. Remain humble, that you are saved by grace. That grace is ridiculous, that you are saved by grace. You are the wild one being put back into there, being so cut off. And on Thursdays, we have Bible study right now. You're invited to come to that. It's in Zoom. There was a revelation this week that I had never really thought of before, and it kind of came out during the study. And it's almost like God is saying this, like it's almost like He's saying to them, realize it's by grace you've been saved. And if you don't show grace to these Jews that are coming in, you're just like they were in the Old Testament. And that you have a chance of falling off. And I think that's a good lesson for us all today when we are discussing about who's in and who's out, that we might be best served by just being graceful to the people around us. So what does all this mean? Like, why are we talking? Why are we talking about grafting things and all that? So I think what it has to do with, we get caught on little verses here and there. We get caught like we get caught on like, for by grace you've been saved through faith, which is a great verse, and it's 100% true, and it's wonderful, right? But sometimes I think we believe it has no bearing on how we look at the world around us. So we become so inoculated to it that we don't see the context for why Paul is saying, for by grace you've been saved through faith. That so many times I think we're proud in our faith, that we're so proud in the things that we understand about our faith that it's at the expense of other people. I understand this. Why can't they get it? Can you believe those people and how they think that they're going to be saved? Can you hear the pride in those statements? Can you hear the tone? Where we think in our hearts that our way is the way? That we are the roots and the trunk, and that everyone else would be better if they were grafted into us? I'm currently outside of a popular Yeehaw Junction Publix, where today an elderly woman by the name of Beatrix, she was shopping here with her groceries, and she was coming out and she saw that there were 4 young men getting into her car. Well, she was a woman of determination. She always got all of her coupons done, and she immediately dropped all of her groceries. She knew exactly what to do. She reached into her purse and she pulled out a handgun from her purse, and she pointed at them and she said, "I have a gun and I know how to use it. Get out of the car." Well, the four men are reported that they jumped out of the car as fast as they could, and they ran across the parking lot here, all the way past the Burger King and the Taco Bell. It is then reported that the woman got into her car. She was shaking, and she stopped, and she pulled out her keys, and she went to start the car, and it wouldn't turn. It wouldn't turn. And wouldn't you be surprised that she noticed that her car was not in this row, but it was just in the next row over. I'm telling you guys, she felt awful, and she went straight to the police department to tell about what she did. She told them that she had pulled these guns on these four guys, and she felt terrible about it. And after she finished telling her story, the police officer began erupting into laughter and had her look over, and those four guys were at the desk of another officer filing a complaint for good reasons about a 5-foot-tall, small, older woman with white hair had stolen their car with a very large handgun. It's reported that they are still laughing even to this very hour. Back to you in the studio. The lady there knew that she was right? That she knew that they were in her car, and she had to take things into her own hands, so much so that she pulled out her large handgun and pointed it at them. And I think this is what Paul is saying to us about our own pride. He's saying that watch out for when you know that you're right. When you absolutely know that you are the root. Because you were actually grafted in by grace, not by what you did. You were the wild one, the less fruitful one. So don't be so desperate, right? Don't be so desperate to be right and all those things. But rest in the faith a little bit. This woman was desperate, so desperate that she pulled a gun on the rightful owners of the car. So be humble a little bit. There are so many times when we just can feel so desperate, when the world just feels so broken around us. Right now, do I wear a mask or don't I? How do I judge the people that are choosing different choices than I am? Do I get that experimental treatment for cancer or not? Do I confront that person that hurt me last week? Why don't people live like they used to? Why don't people believe like they used to? It seems like everything is going away from Christianity. Why, when last week when I gathered for hot dogs and fireworks with my family, that Uncle Larry went off again on his weird conspiracy religious theories? Why can't my own family just agree on the matters of faith? When we feel like we're up against a wall, when we begin to feel desperate about life all around us, when things are changing at an ever increasing rate and we just don't understand what's happening that's when we curl in on ourselves. And we begin to believe the lie that if everyone would just believe like me, if everyone would love Jesus just like I do, if everyone would just go to church, if everyone would just bring respect back, we get so desperate and scared, and we feel like we're pressed against a wall, and we do things out of desperation. Like pulling out a gun on guys who are getting into their own car, right? And we can believe that our answers are the answers. And when we believe that, we begin to push people away in arrogance. And I think Paul is calling us back here. He's saying that you, the wild branch that is less fruitful, you have been grafted in, that is the very nature of grace, that God has given you grace, that it isn't prideful, it isn't a certain belief system, that God has made you part of His family, and that it is a state of humbleness. And I think we see this all through the Bible as well. And there's this one story. Remember, we went through the stories about Elijah and Elisha? Well, Paul picks up on one of them here. Remember that story where everyone all of a sudden wanted, after the prophets of Baal, everyone wanted to kill Elijah, and he went out into the wilderness, into the edge of this cave, and he's just going to God. He's like, just kill me now, God. Everyone wants to kill me. They killed all the prophets before, and they want to kill me now. Like, what? I'm just done. There's no one left. I am the only one righteous, right? He was literally up against a wall feeling desperate, right? And he's just like, just end it now. I'm the only one that's left, and I can't continue on any longer. And do you remember what God said to him? In that time, He goes, oh, Elijah, you feel like you're the only one. But just down in that town over there, I have reserved 7,000 people that are faithful. Or as Paul quotes the story in Romans 11, verse 5, so too at the present time, there's a remnant chosen by grace. See, this whole saved by grace thing is not anything new, and that God has been keeping us even in those desperate times. He's keeping us, so continue to be humble, because it's like God is saying, remember, I got this. You're saved by grace. God is in control. He has sent Jesus to you. You are saved through Him, and He is with you. So what does this look like then? What does living in grace look like? Well, I think it's how you look at the end of all things. Because I think the normal kind of Christian story about how all of this is going to end is that there's going to be like this great fight, that we're going to be fighting for what's right, with Jesus at our backs, hoping that we're right enough and good enough in our actions and belief, that we'd be made all the right choices, that we'd be able to go to the good place when all this is done. I think that's kind of the normal vision that if you read like a Left Behind novel that's telling us. But I think Paul wants us to see something else. What Romans is having us look like here, that the end will probably look more like that police station with the 4 scared guys and with the old lady with the gun, and everyone's laughing. I think it's how we look at those toddlers who fall down and we're all laughing, right? Looking back at our own past mistakes, looking back at the mistakes that our neighbor has made, looking back at the mistakes that those people that we've never even met on the other side of the world, that they have made, and looking back with laughter at how wrong we had it all. But it's okay, because the Lord is on your side. He's the creator of all, and He has had it in hand the entire time, because by grace you have been saved through Jesus Christ, through faith in Him, that we might receive eternal life. That we look back with joy at each other's company and the good news of the kingdom of God, that we are all here despite our mistakes, because of God's ridiculous grace. I think the end of all things, it's going to be a big laugh. Because when you get good news, it usually makes you laugh. Have a great weekend, y'all. We'll see you soon.